Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video where we're going to cover 2023 NBA Draft Night trades, and this is not just focused on one specific team. In fact, we're going to cover a ton of different teams. That we've done some very specific team potential trade possibilities that we could see on draft night, and I think this one a little bit more league focused and ones that I think we should really watch for. So I'm very excited for it. If you do enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. There's gonna be a ton of 2023 NBA draft content as well as just NBA content in general. I'm super excited for the future of the channel, working on getting my new setup currently set up. I'm also in the process of moving, so a lot of changing parts on the channel right now, kind of in the process of setting up my new setup, which is why you see what's behind me right now, completely different than what it typically looks like, because I'm in the process of setting something completely new up. So I'm really excited for the future of the channel. Without further ado, let's jump into it here with the video preview, where we have 7 potential draft night trades, which include 14 different teams. I wanted a fan of every single team basically included in this video. Didn't get to all 30 teams, but maybe we'll make another video down the line. These are rough frameworks and kind of rough ideas for deals. Now, there might be some things you disagree with. Just look at it kind of as a framework, and more so, we're just discussing and talking about some possibilities, not necessarily like hey, this trade's 100% going to happen or not. It's just more of that time of the year where if you guys hear a trade idea that I have, maybe it spurs some type of idea into your head about maybe I don't like this package to this team, but maybe this team could really use it. And then that's, I think, the best way to look about these types of trades. So I would love to hear your guys' draft night trade ideas in the comment section. So make sure you comment them down below. I do read every single comment on the channel, as well as a lot of the discussion on the Discord channel. Make sure to hop into our Discord, links in the description for that. And I would likely make a video covering your ideas within the next 7 days or so, because I'm always looking for great trade ideas. And if I see some ideas that I actually really like down in the comment section, I will react to those, and I'll kind of prompt the other viewers with those as well in a future video. So make sure to drop your comments down below. I'd love to see them. Jumping into trade number 1 now, this is a deal between the Indiana Pacers and the Golden State Warriors. Pacers are actually going to be featured twice in this video, and the first one here is a swap of pick number 19, where the Pacers pick up that selection from the Golden State Warriors, and the Warriors move down to picks 26 and pick number 32. And there's a few reasons why this deal makes sense. First of all, Golden State, after getting bounced in the second round of the playoffs, the first time that they've lost in the Western Conference playoffs under Steve Kerr, they have some decisions to make about what their team's going to look like. And I think the one big difference from their team this past year from where they were a year ago when they won the title, in the NBA, was the fact that they had less depth this time around. I think they were missing the Nemanja Bjelica, the Otto Porter Juniors of the world. Of course, they ended up trading back for Gary Payton II. They were missing him so bad. And I think this is a good opportunity to move down only 7 spots. Perhaps you still draft the guy you would have drafted earlier. Perhaps a Trace Jackson Davis could be an example of that. And you also pick up another opportunity to take a stab on a player at 32. There's not really a big drop off, in my opinion, from picks 26 to 32 anyway. And you also do have a good amount of cap saving just simply moving down from 19 to 26. And you also get what would be probably a non-guaranteed or at least cheap deal on a second round player. I think that does make a lot of sense for where Golden State's currently at. And from Indiana's perspective, it's a pretty cheap way to move up. They also do have pick 29. I thought about that being included for Golden State, but I also thought, hey, the second round value, it's not much different between pick 29 and pick 32. It actually makes more sense for Golden State if they feel like they're going to draft the same player anyway to actually save a little bit of money in the second round by drafting him there, especially with the guaranteed situation. And for Indiana, it's a pretty cheap price to move up to 19. You jump up 7 spots, costs you a pretty high second round pick. And I think the Pacers proved last year that with a high second round selection, you can add a good player. They did so with Andrew Nembhard a year ago. But the Pacers, they take advantage of this here. They have 5 picks coming into this draft. They do not need to use all 5 selections. They move up here with this one to go up and get a guy like a Leonard Miller, who has worked out for them. Was one of the few first-round graded players that's actually worked out for the team in a group workout. Now, at pick number 7, they've been using a lot of their individual workouts for that, where they brought in Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks. Leonard Miller is a guy that was a part of a group workout, but he was one of the few first round grade players that they brought in outside of those three that I mentioned just a second ago. And because of that, it leads me to believe that the Pacers do have some serious interest in him. Now, they've also had some rumored interest in Bobby Klintman from Wake Forest. You could argue that maybe that's who the guy they'd move up to get is. I think that would be a little less likely if they were to just stick with those picks. I think it'd be more likely that they look at just drafting Klintman at 26. And maybe they still do at 29, which is why they kept that pick in this trade. But ultimately, getting Leonard Miller would be a really nice get for them. I think he would be a phenomenal fit onto this roster. And let's say they do go with Cam Whitmore at 7, come back and get Leonard Miller, who was really productive at 19. You're feeling really good about the future of this team, and you're kind of adding a bunch of hybrid athleticism, multiple play styles that I think would fit next to Tyrese Haliburton. And I think the team would just be significantly better for the long term after making a move like this and ensuring that you're getting the guy you really want, which in this case, in my opinion, could potentially be Leonard Miller. Going on to trade number 2, this one, another deal with the Indiana Pacers, and this one's with the Brooklyn Nets, where the Pacers actually land Dorian Finney-Smith from the Brooklyn Nets. This is one of my favorite trades to mock, and I actually did mock this in my own Indiana Pacers draft night trades video, so this one probably looks a little familiar. I think this is one of the most likely trades from the entire video because Dorian Finney-Smith has history with the Indiana Pacers coaching staff. You remember some of the assistants and Rick Carlisle specifically, who are the coaches now for Indiana, coached Dorian Finney-Smith and oversaw most of his development while he was with the Dallas Mavericks organization. So the pairing makes a lot of sense, specifically given the fact that Indiana could use kind of this proven forward who I think we all know would be a really good fit next to Haliburton, a player who is a fantastic driving kick guy, one of the best drivers of the basketball in general, Tyrese Haliburton is. And I think Dorian Finney-Smith, somebody who as a 3-and-D wing has paid off a ton of drive and kick opportunities, and he would continue to do so for Indiana while still bringing some of that toughness, defensive versatility, being able to guard out on the wing, match up with guards as well, something he does very well. And I think he'd help kind of build that defensive identity that I think the Pacers are looking for. And for the Nets, you do have to eat a little bit of salary here in Daniel Theis. I don't think the Pacers want to sacrifice all of their flexibility just by eating Dorian's contract. Now, I think that they'd be happy to take him in if that's the only way that Brooklyn will do it. But I think realistically for Indiana, they're giving up 2 first-round picks here. They would like to get off of Theis's money, and it also does help Brooklyn potentially repackage these 2 selections, picks 26 and 29, with their current selections 21 and 22, to potentially send a 4-pick offer to a team, which is pretty rare to see 4 picks in one draft, especially in the first round for a team. That's what the Nets would be lined up to have after making this trade. We would probably see this expanded into some form of a 3-team deal where picks 26 and 29 are being rerouted to another organization, and the Nets are maybe making a shift on what their roster looks like. Daniel Theis then maybe gets rerouted somewhere as well. But all in all, the Nets at least get some money saving here. They bring in 2 more assets that they could look to flip later, and they could really go into the marketplace and find something that they want to add. And Dorian Finney-Smith just didn't fit as good in Brooklyn. I think that they have too many of the same type of player right now. And Dorian, just because of his age, probably the odd man out there a little bit more. And I think Indiana would be the team that's very happy to scoop him up. And for 2 first-round picks, it's not a cheap price, but Indiana can justify it because of their relationship with him as a player. They know how he's going to fit with Rick Carlisle, but also, additionally, they already have other picks. They've got 7. They've got pick 32. They're one of the few teams that could look to expend 2 first-round picks if it means bringing in a good player right now, and that's Dorian Finney-Smith to a T. Moving on to trade number 3, we have a deal between the Houston Rockets and the Charlotte Hornets, and this one's a little bit different, and one that actually kind of was presented in our Discord mock draft that we had just a couple days ago, and I've made some adjustments to it, a couple alterations. There's no Terry Rozier in this deal, but pick number 2 goes to the Houston Rockets, who move up with the Hornets, and instead the Hornets now receive pick number 4, pick number 20 in this draft, a 2024 first from the Brooklyn Nets, a 2026 first from the Brooklyn Nets, and a young player in Josh Christopher, who likely doesn't have a role in Houston if the Rockets were to draft Scoot Henderson, which is the entire point of making this trade, is to get ahead of the Portland Trailblazers and draft the guy you really want, which is Scoot Henderson to be the face of the franchise, the future starting point guard, and the guy who's really going to be a good organizer, a very good playmaker for them. Of course, the athletic traits do jump off the screen. He's got a 6'9" wingspan as a guard. He jumps out of the gym, extremely powerful and strong. I mean, just look at the muscles on this guy. He's a very impressive prospect and somebody who I think is going to continue to impress a lot of people. And the Rockets should be a player in the trade market to maybe move up if they want to. They've got the assets from the Brooklyn Nets. They can go out and make a deal if they want to, and this is one that I would recommend them looking into, is moving up to get Scoot Henderson. And from the Charlotte Hornets perspective, there's been a lot of rumors about them potentially taking Brandon Miller second overall. I'm not certain if I buy that yet, but if that is the reality, I think it's very fair to say that you could trade down realistically and get away with it, because so far the Portland Trailblazers have had both Scoot Henderson and Amen Thompson in their facilities. They have not had Brandon Miller there yet for a workout. Now, is it possible that at some point over the next couple of weeks they do? Yes, that's 100% possible. And is it possible that they keep that on the down low and maybe it's a surprise thing that nobody knows about? Maybe. But as of right now, I 100% know both Scoot Henderson and Amen Thompson have worked out for the Blazers. I know both of those workouts have went very well. Because of it, I think the Blazers would realistically look into drafting Amen Thompson third overall if Scoot Henderson's off the board, which would maybe push Brandon Miller down to fourth overall. Anyway, the Hornets still arguably get the guy that they would maybe have taken at 2. They add pick 20 as well and 2 future first-round picks from the Brooklyn Nets. It seems like a huge win, in my opinion, for the Hornets, and Rockets fans might be saying that's a really steep price to pay. If you feel like the difference between Scoot Henderson being on your roster and not being on your roster is a big one, it's one that you have to be willing to pay, because going out, making sure you get him, it incentivizes the Hornets to make this deal, and I think it's one that both teams realistically win, because the Hornets, if they were going to draft Brandon Miller anyway, you're still getting him, and if you're the Rockets, you're landing the point guard of the future in Scoot Henderson. I think it's a huge win for both sides. Trade number 4 here, we have one between the Utah Jazz and my Dallas Mavericks, and this one's a little bit different, kind of similar to what we talked about with that deal earlier between the Pacers and Warriors. The Dallas Mavericks currently own pick 10, and they would actually be trading that selection to the Utah Jazz, and they'd be picking back up number 16 in this year's draft and pick number 28. And I think that this might look a little surprising, especially to some Mavs fans, where they say, wait, we'd rather just have a lottery pick. Number 10 is a really good pick to have. I agree, but the Mavericks have a lot of needs. And what I mean by that, this team needs more young players in general. Right now, you're kind of banking on Jaden Hardy and Josh Green to be the 2 long-term fits next to Luka Doncic. And while that is a pretty decent place to start, you look at the lay of the land right now in the NBA, a lot of teams, if they're not contenders right now or making a lot of noise right now at least, they have a lot of young talent. You think about the Pistons, the Rockets, and the San Antonio Spurs as well. Some of those teams that realistically could pass up the Dallas Mavericks if the Mavericks don't prioritize adding more good young depth, and they get 2 shots now in this draft instead of just 1 at pick 10. And at 16, you realistically can maybe add a guy like Jordan Hawkins. You can maybe find a big man. Maybe Derek Lively is still on the board for you at 16, a player who I think the Mavs would consider at 10 anyway. And then at 28, maybe you can take a stab at another type of prospect, whether that's a Brandon Pajemski from Santa Clara who can really shoot the ball, which I think the Mavs need more shooting for sure. Otherwise, you could maybe look at trading that pick and bringing something back in if you're able to find a deal around that. There's a lot of things you could consider, but nonetheless, you're adding 2 picks for the price of 1, moving down 6 spots in this draft with the depth. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And for Utah, you're maybe saying, well, then why would we do it if there's so much depth and the draft is so deep? It's because maybe Utah falls in love with 2 players in the top 10. They have pick 9 right now, so they're going through a lot of evaluation of some of those top tier prospects to figure out who the right guy is for them. And let's say maybe they don't want to risk it. Maybe both guys are there for them and they say, we're not sure if he's going to get to number 16 and we really want him. Can you afford to move up 28 and 16 to go get the guy you really want at number 10? I 100% think you can realistically mortgage that, just given the fact that the Jazz have so many selections from both the Timberwolves and the Cavaliers over the next 6 or 7 years. They're in a position where they could afford to make a 2-for-1 trade. And this is the time to do it if you fall in love with the guy, with how good this draft is. I mean, it's deep, but it's also really strong at the top. And if the Jazz feel like they're not getting just one, but two really good players at picks 9 and then pick 10, it's a home run for them. And you're adding to a really good core. Maybe that's a Taylor Hendricks. Maybe that's an Anthony Black. Maybe it's a Cason Wallace, who I could see Danny Ainge falling in love with. There's a lot of options there at the top, and Utah moving back up from 16 to 10 to make sure that they get the guy they want, I think would be a really worthwhile move for the franchise. Trade number 5, we have a deal here between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Chicago Bulls, and this is one of those that I'm not really sure about. This is probably one of the least likely trades in the entire video, but it is one where the Lakers kind of pivot back into that 3-star territory, but at a much lesser cost in terms of your roster that you're giving up. The Lakers would still have Austin Reeves. The Lakers would still be able to keep D'Angelo Russell. You're not giving up a ton of the pieces that you currently possess on your roster, and you're going out and landing DeMar DeRozan, who previously has stated he would love to play for the Lakers. LeBron James, I think, would have a lot of interest in DeMar DeRozan coming to the Los Angeles Lakers. I think you could argue he would be a pretty nice fit onto this roster, as he's a great mid-range scorer. I think something the Lakers need a little bit more of is that kind of half-court self-creation capability. And DeRozan, I think, is an underrated passer. He's really grown his game in the last 4 or 5 years. You think back to the beginning of his tenure in San Antonio, that's really when we started to see that uptick in kind of on-ball usage, and off of that, his ability to decision make and create for others. He's grown there. So I think he could be a fantastic addition for the Lakers, because even though he doesn't shoot the 3 ball very well, you're not sacrificing a lot, only giving up Malik Beasley, who I'm expecting them to pick up their team option on, just so they can use him as a tradable contract. And you also send out Mo Bamba, who didn't play very much this year for you. You also have to give up pick number 17 to the Bulls, who do not have a first-round pick, and you also attach 4 second-round picks as well, one of them being this year. It gets the Bulls back into this year's draft, gives them a pretty decent asset to pick with. There could be a good variety of prospects to play with at that spot. There's a lot of talent in this year's draft, in my opinion. I think moving up to 17 is a legitimate good asset. Now, you can argue, is that worth it for DeMar DeRozan? Maybe not, because Beasley, Bamba, they're not long-term deals. You're not locking yourself into anything. Now, I do think the most realistic outcome for Chicago is that they kind of run it back with the team next year. You could argue that's not the right decision, but this is their one opportunity to probably trade off DeMar DeRozan as he's going into the final year of his contract. Could you get a first-round pick for him otherwise? That's something that I'm not sure about. If they wait until the trade deadline, I just don't know if that's going to be out there for them. At this spot, they get to make their selection of a young player and add him into the fold, and also add a variety of second-round picks with no long-term money. I think it does make some sense for both sides. Like I said, though, I don't think the Bulls actually execute this deal, but I wanted to lay it out as a potential framework. And it was actually kind of floated to me on Discord by one of the Discord users. I believe it was Unlimited. So shout out to Unlimited if you're watching this video right now. Trade number 6, we have a 3-team deal between the Portland Trailblazers, Boston Celtics, and Minnesota Timberwolves. And this one, I think, is one that people have kind of lined up the numbers on a little bit already. First of all, the Portland Trailblazers, the headliner here for them is Jaylen Brown. It would really hinge on Jaylen Brown basically coming out and saying, I'm not wanting to play for the Boston Celtics long term. Now, if I were running the Celtics, I would give him a lot of money and tie him to the franchise, which is ultimately what I think Brad Stevens does, since Brown is now Supermax eligible. Kyle Anderson also comes to the Blazers. I think he would be actually a pretty nice passer for them. Gives them something they currently don't have, which is kind of a sized decision maker. Currently on this team, you have Dame, you have Simons, but you don't have a lot of big players who make a lot of good reads. Nurkic does that a little bit, but as you see, he's also out in this deal. So getting someone back like that would help. And then you're also getting a floor spacing big in Mike Muscala. He doesn't really mean a lot in this deal, but for the Blazers, it's another contract you can fit in, gives you a little bit of depth at the center spot. Again, you're not selling yourself on, oh, Muscala is going to be great. It's just, can this guy play a role for us? And I think the answer to that is yes. Boston pivots off of Mike Muscala because they're landing Karl Anthony Towns, who would be, I think, a very good fit for Joe Mazzulla, who likes to get up 3-point attempts. Karl Anthony Towns is one of the best shooting big men of all time. Shoots very well from behind the 3-point line. In fact, he just had his second worst season of his career from behind the 3-point line, and it was still over 36% from 3. That's how good of a 3-point shooter he is. Most oftentimes he flirts with 40%, and I think just the fact that he missed so much time this past year probably hurt his overall percentages, just because he had a smaller sample size than typical. You also get Taurean Prince in here as a kind of wing replacement for Jaylen Brown moving out the door, you have to bring in some type of wing body. Taurean Prince, I think, a very good team defender, very willing to step in, take charges, draw contact. And I think he's just a smart overall rotational defender in what becomes a pretty big facelift for all three teams involved. I think Taurean Prince a pretty nice piece. And then the Timberwolves give the Celtics 2 second-round picks as well in this deal, and the Blazers send a 2024 second-rounder to the Boston Celtics. Part of the reason to make this deal for Boston as well, again, I don't think that they do this ultimately. It's just kind of more of that like idea think of, hey, let's look at some of the possibilities and is this reasonable or not? Part of the reason why Boston would execute this is if they felt backed into a corner by Jaylen Brown since he's going into the final year of his deal, and if he's basically giving you signs that he's not going to stick with the franchise long term, regardless of what contract you offer him, then that's probably a reason to look into pulling the trigger on something like this, where you do get an all-NBA player back who probably does fit your head coach pretty well. I just don't see Brad Stevens being the guy to do this. But at the end of the day, in terms of talent you're bringing back in the door for Jaylen Brown, Karl-Anthony Towns is around that same level. And then for the Timberwolves, you eat Jusuf Nurkic's contract, probably becomes a backup big for this team behind Rudy Gobert. You take in Anthony Simons. Some view him as a negative contract. Some view him as properly paid. Some view him as a superstar. Blazers fans, I'm going to tell you right now, Anthony Simons is not a superstar, but I do think he's a very good player. I think that in the right role with the right surrounding pieces around him, he could be a really good impact player. I know Portland right now just doesn't feel like necessarily the right situation for that. I think that the Blazers need more defense, more rim protection. They don't necessarily address that here, but they do get some point of attack defenders and just smart players in general. And Kyle Anderson, I think Jaylen Brown has the defensive physicals to at least be competitive. It's been kind of up and down with him defensively over the last couple of years, but the Wolves also add in Peyton Pritchard here, so they get a player who can become their new long-term backup point guard behind Mike Conley. I just don't think Jordan McLaughlin is really the answer. They get pick number 3, who is their long-term starting point guard, especially after Mike Conley goes out the door at some point. Just because Scoot Henderson would become the face of the franchise next to Anthony Edwards. The two of them would be so good together. And you also think about the fact that Scoot Henderson, where he's from, just kind of does line up with, I think, fitting around Anthony Edwards. I think the two of them would be incredibly difficult to defend because both of them can break you down in isolation. Both of them can get downhill and finish. Ant's a growing passer. I think Scoot Henderson over the last year has really progressed as a facilitator as well. Minnesota would be pretty scary, honestly, with Gobert, with Scoot, with Ant, with McDaniels. I really like that team, to be honest, long term. I think Gobert is going to age decently well in this league just because he's so big. You also get pick number 23 and pick number 43 in this year's draft. You could maybe have an argument that pick 23 has to either stay with the Blazers or maybe that pick doesn't go out the door at all. And if it does go out the door, maybe it goes to the Boston Celtics. I think there's some arguing you can do about where that pick's going to go. And maybe that's something that would slow down this trade. But I think realistically, this is a decent package you lay out. Karl-Anthony Towns, of course, so accomplished individually. Jaylen Brown's had a lot of team success and some individual accomplishment. And for what Portland's moving off of, this is a package with 0 all-star players going back to Minnesota. Now, the question is, does Scoot Henderson live up to potential or not? If Charlotte were to essentially take Brandon Miller second overall, that's what you're basing this off of completely if you're Minnesota, and you feel confident that, hey, Scoot Henderson is the point guard of the future of this team, and I think you build a really dynamic 1-2 punch between him and Ant, which would be, I think, must-watch basketball there in Minneapolis. Then moving into our final trade number 7, and this is one between the Memphis Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors, and I think this is flat out the most likely trade to see on draft night. And there is a little bit of a complication here that we have to talk about, and it centers around Tyus Jones. Are the Grizzlies going to be willing to trade Tyus Jones or not, given the fact that we are expecting a suspension to Ja Morant? I think the answer to that is still probably they would be. Now, it has to be for the right player. It has to be in the right deal. And I think this is a big overpay by the Grizzlies. Now, I'm going to talk about the pros of getting this player in a second, but I think this is a lot to give up for him. But you're giving up Tyus Jones, Zaire Williams, who you had previously traded up to get. It hasn't really lived up to the expectations up to this point. But for the Raptors, they've been a team that would love to add a former lottery pick. That's kind of in their DNA. Think about when they traded Kyle Lowry to the Miami Heat. Getting Precious Achiuwa back felt like a huge win for them, and they're getting not one but two of those guys here because they're also landing Santi Aldama, a player who I think Masai Ujiri would drool over because he's a big, tall, lengthy player, but has a pretty good perimeter skill set, can put the ball on the deck a little bit, drive the basketball, and kick out to shooters around him. I do think these are two intriguing young players that the Raptors would be adding, and they'd be getting a point guard in Tyus Jones with Van Vliet and Gary Trent Jr. both heading toward free agency. There's some open minutes in the backcourt. I think Tyus Jones could fill a significant amount of those, probably be the starter next year, assuming Van Vliet bolts either to Houston or Phoenix or Philadelphia, which look like the most likely landing spots currently. And you also, if you're Toronto, you get pick 25 this year, you get the Warriors pick next year, and you get a first round pick in 25 and 2027 from the Grizzlies, which seems like a lot to give up for a non-all-star, but reportedly the Grizzlies did offer 4 first round picks for OG Anunoby at the trade deadline, and the Raptors supposedly said no. But I think now the situation is a little bit different. Maybe the Raptors would consider this a little bit more now that we are actually at the draft. Kind of feels a little bit different. And maybe there was no inclusion of a Santi Aldama or Zaire Williams. Maybe the trade was centered around Dillon Brooks' contract, which the Raptors maybe felt a little so-so about. And in this situation, they actually would make this deal arguably because of Santi Aldama and Zaire Williams' inclusion. And for the Grizzlies, what you're getting back is an all defense level player, a guy who is one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league. And for Memphis, you might be saying, well, it hurts to give up Tyus Jones, who's our backup point guard and really important for the team during the regular season. But the question is, when you have to lay all your chips down on the line and it's, game 7 of a playoff series and there's 5 minutes left in the game, is Tyus Jones going to be on the floor? The answer to that is maybe not, especially if Ja Morant is actually around. It's going to be Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, OG Anunoby, Jaren Jackson Jr., and then one of Brandon Clark or Steven Adams, I feel, would be the most likely outcome. And the fact that you're pivoting here from Dillon Brooks to OG Anunoby, who's a significantly better shooter, means you can probably play Steven Adams or Brandon Clark even more in the playoffs because you don't have now kind of a bad shooter who likes to shoot a lot and a non-shooter. You have a good shooter in OG Anunoby in that role of what Dillon Brooks was, which I think is a significant upgrade for the team. And you also get Malachi Flynn back, a former intriguing draft pick back when the Raptors selected him. He hasn't really proven a lot yet up to this point, but he's got a very good handle. He's a good shot maker. And I think if you're Memphis, with how Tyus Jones' career was playing out versus how he's played for them under Taylor Jenkins, you're probably hoping that Malachi Flynn could take that similar step forward. Now, I think they're very different. Flynn's more of a shot creator, shot maker, whereas Tyus Jones is more of a floor general. He's going to take care of the basketball. I think they're different, but I think Memphis could realistically get the most out of Malachi Flynn, and it's worth it if you feel like at the end of the day, OG Anunoby would be one of your top 3 or 4 players on your roster. I think there's a good argument to that. And the Grizzlies are kind of building a good big 4 that they'd have to lock themselves into long term. But I think given the team and how they've played in the playoffs, they're hungry to make a big win now move, and OG Anunoby could be a really nice addition for them. And yes, it does hurt to give up Tyus Jones. Yes, it hurts to cut ties with Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, and a bunch of picks. But if you think OG Anunoby is the difference between a second round exit and maybe a finals appearance, that's one that you have to make. And I could see myself believing, and I could see the Grizzlies believing, that OG Anunoby could make that kind of difference in the postseason. Because when he is healthy, he's a very, very good player and very impactful player on both ends of the floor that I think would be awesome for Memphis. And I think the fact that Mikal Bridges has played so well in Brooklyn since being traded there, that you could argue, hey, maybe OG Anunoby in a bigger offensive role, we could see him kind of exceed and excel in ways that we haven't so far. And that's probably in the back of the Grizzlies' minds as well when it comes to making a decision about a potential trade like this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Y'all are really the best. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. I hope you did enjoy. Again, if you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Check out some of the other videos on the channel as well. A reminder, I'm going to have an NBA mock draft coming out again very soon. Very excited for that one, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.